is Policy Discuss, a segment on the front burners. It's time we look at critical policy issues and their impact. We'll begin looking at the 2025 budget, which has been totaled at over 49 trillion naira. And that budget has been christened the budget of restoration. Before that, in 2024, the 2024 budget was named budget of renewed hope. And so now we have the budget of restoration. Let's piggyback on the 2024 budget named renewed hope. Did we get the hope of Nigerians, were the hope of Nigerians actually renewed from that budget? And then coming to what this new budget has been named, budget of restoration. What is going to be restored to Nigerians' hope, dividends of democracy? We're going to look at all of that on the table. I want to get your thoughts, Dr. Idahosa. From renewed hope, now we're at restoration. If we look at that budget, which was about 27 trillion naira for the year 2024, can you say that the hope of Nigerians were renewed given the implementation of the budgets?
Well, I think the renewal of hope is a process. I don't know if you have any knowledge of what renewal means for an eagle, which says one of the birds that can live longer than almost every other birds in the jungle, has capacity of living up to 70 years. But when it's trying to get to that level of living longer than 40 years, it takes a very crucial turn in its own way. And that includes taking a flight to the top of a high rock, where he will have to take away all the claws that are now bent, the beak that can no longer catch prey very well. He has to remove it. All the feathers that are weak, you have to find a way to drop them. And then, of course, as it is said, it says on that top of the mountain for 150 days before taking a new flight. And I think that is what we should look at the process of restoration and recovery to mean for us as a country. And I think what stands out for me very critically in the budget is the fact that today we are looking at a budget of 49 trillion, where, of course, we're looking at our ability to raise over 36 trillion of that sum. And what is in deficit is just about 13 trillion, of course, which, of course, you have again to source through borrowing. What that means is that there are some, they say, some flickers of light here and there that portend hope. Things are getting back again, and that is what it means to restore, that we are trying to set ourselves on a trajectory of being a prosperous nation once again, that the things that we had hitherto thought were hamstringing us are no longer going to be there. Issues that we have to talk about: subsidy for electricity, subsidy for petrol, and the rest of it. All of others are becoming almost history. And so with the new budget, we're saying that about 14 trillion is going in for capital expenditure and about 14 billion also for recurrent expenditure. So to that extent, between recurrent and capital, you are seeing some semblance of balance. And in a nutshell for me, and I think it's something that Nigerians can be very hopeful about, that if we can actually get this to work at between 70 to 80%, Nigerian will see some hope.
Doc, you just gave us an overview of the 2025 budget after talking about the performance of 2024 budget. So with the overview that you've given, let's begin to look at the budget. Now, one aspect that we will look at first is the budget total, which is 49.74 trillion naira, and the revenue that the government is projecting is about 36.35 trillion naira. So that gives a deficit of 13.39 trillion budget. I think in a very long while, this is the first budget that we're seeing that deficit is just minimal, is quite low compared to what used to obtain. Before, deficit used to be like the major percentage when you look at the budget. So revenue from the government is going to come from different sources, not just from oil alone, which I think is very creative. So if we look at what the government plans, the areas the government plans to rake in revenue from, NLNG alone, which is a Nigerian liquefied natural gas company, is going to bring in 7.52 billion naira. Independent revenues going to bring in 3.47 trillion naira. Aid and grants is going to give the federal government 761.91 billion naira. The federal government's share of net federation revenue is going to bring in 27.49 trillion naira. So I see that the federal government is putting all of it, or putting a huge chunk of its share of the net federation revenue, which will take us to asking states later on, what are they going to do with theirs if the federal government is putting in 27.49 trillion naira of what they got from the federation revenue. So oil is going to bring in 1.46 trillion naira. One would have thought that oil would be the largest contributor, but seems to be like the least here. Okay, one of the least, not the least, but one of the lowest contributors here. So special funds, accounts, or receipts will bring in 300 billion naira, and also government-owned enterprises will bring in 2.87 trillion naira. That's also a good one to know that government-owned enterprises are generating some fund. Priya, what's your thoughts?
Okay. I think Doc alluded to budget performance whilst he was giving a brief touch here and there. One thing that will guarantee that all these funds, these proposed areas where we are going to be getting receipts here and there, and to be allocated for whatever purpose is going to be used for, either in the in NPA or in any other ministries, to bring about capital development in the country, will be based on the work that both the minister of those specified ministries are going to do and the eagle eyes of the Senate and the House of Representatives in terms of probity, in terms of carrying out their oversight functions effectively, to make sure that some of these billions that we are talking about is not just frittered away. Because when you don't pay attention to details. Recently, I think the Chairman House Committee in the Senate for Finance and Budget, is it Honorable Musa or Senator Musa, was, raising a voice concerning some of the agencies that may not receive budget allocation because they refuse to show up in the National Assembly for budget defense, while Mr. President was, giving the budget, was dropping the budget in the National Assembly with the Senate or the joint session of the National Assembly. He said that the ministers and the head of agencies and parastatals are going to be there to defend it. Because when they come, of course, the Senate and the committee is going to pose question on the way and manner they spent the previous budget, and how the Senate has gone about the Ministry of Information, and how they are clamoring that the 8.9 billion naira that was allocated to the Ministry of Orientation, a national agency, a national orientation, was insufficient, and that they will need more money to add on to that because that particular ministry or that particular agency is playing a critical role. So, in the budget execution of the executive arm of government, the men in the red chamber and in the green chamber, it will now be on their table for them to go to site to inspect the billions that we are giving into these ministries, if they are being used for the purpose for which they are being used. And if they are not being used, politics should be put aside, and they should call them to order, whether they belong to the same political party or not. Because the budget of renewed hope is not going to be in words only. It's not going to be in mouth. It's going to be based on action. And the hopes of Nigerians will not be renewed. It will be dimmed the more if where we are putting our money into is not being looked at for performance purposes.
Yeah, but I think the bigger task, which is really ahead of us, is the mode in which budgets are prepared, especially within the ministry, departments, and agencies of government. And I think there should be a kind of a shift from the current zero-based budget and a incremental model of budgeting for me. And I think I raised this issue with the chairman of the Public Account Committee at the lower chamber. We cannot be talking about performance of budget when in actual sense, the preparation of budget had no factor in performance into its model. So what that means for us is that at certain levels, so nothing has happened, so zero budget. What does this ministry and agency mean? I think government must take time, especially when they are creating the next medium-term economic framework, to see what are the critical milestones that Nigerians need immediately right now that need to be achieved, that can give us some sense of development, had to be comprehensively articulated. Because if we have time now to actually go detail into the budget, for example, see in the same budget, all the several commissions that we have now, whether it's the Niger Delta Development Commission, Southeast Development Commission, Northwest Development Commission, Southwest Development Commission. For example, NDDC takes about 774 billion of this budget, or thereabouts, over 700 billion. Northwest is taking about over 500 billion. Southeast is taking over 450 billion. Same with Southwest. Now, all this money has just allocated. Now, what are the specific projects that are going to contribute to national development where these funds are going into? And I think that is the way to go, that we know what the problems are, where are the gaps, so we know what gaps states can fill, what gaps agencies of government can fill, and then budgets are tailored to some of all these things. It's not just enough for somebody to go to the National Assembly and say, the budget they gave to me last year was too small, I need more money. More money to do what? And I think that's where really we are having difficulty in terms of budget implementation. So performance must be factored in the preparation of the budget to see what are we going to achieve. We're going to build this coastal road. What quantum of this year's budget is going to enter? What quantum will enter next year? What quantum will enter in the 8 years? And so this road is seen to be completed. So we have to be scientific in terms of budget preparation. That's where we are going to see better performance. Then people can even hold agencies of government accountable. Not to say, okay, sign money for us, then we can go later and think of the project that this should be used for. And I think that is very, very instructive, that as agencies are bringing in their budgets, the National Assembly must take time to scrutinize, especially the relevant committees regarding these ministries and agencies, to say, where's this money going to? What is the value of this project to our national development? How much of GDP is going to empower? All these conversations must come into the preparation of the budget. But by and large, looking at the figure as they were, on their face value, I think a lot has happened that we have to commend maybe the current regime for, that of course 73% of total expenditure is going to be generated. And in terms of debt service and sinking fund, it's just about 33% of the total budget that's going to go to debt service, as against what we used to have of 98% of your total revenue going into debt service. Now, in this budget, it's about 45% of the total revenue that's accruable by government, except borrowing, that is going to go into debt service and the sinking fund in this budget. And I think that's a huge milestone, given where we are coming from. Last year, it was about 64%, but this year, the projection is 45%, which, of course, is admirable. And we are hopeful that maybe after 8 years of this presidency, Nigeria will be so prosperous that we are not talking about deficit budgeting. We must be transiting into surplus budget, or at worst, a balanced budget.
Now, talking about a balanced budget, let's look at the budgets that are going to the ministries, departments, and agencies of government. I support the motion of the House, the National Assembly, that for ministries, departments, and agencies that would not be present to defend their budget, then they should not get allocation, because I think that's where it starts from. You must be able, if you have drawn a budget, whether it's the civil servants that drawn up the budget and given to the minister, if you have signed over a budget proposal to say this is what, as a ministry, as a department, as an agency of government, we would be needing to function effectively for the 2025 fiscal year, then you should be present to say what each item is for and the amount of money that you have proposed to be allocated is meant for. That's where it starts. If people do not show up to defend their budget proposal, how then do we expect that they would utilize that budget effectively? The name of the budget is Budget of Restoration. So it's not going to be the old way. The government is expecting that hope is restored to the people. It's expecting that the people begin to see development, begin to see some change, at least build on what they've been able to achieve for the year 2025. So I think it starts, that show of responsibility begins from you coming up. I don't think anybody's schedule should be too busy, any minister's schedule to be too busy for them to show up to say, this is what, as a ministry. That way you take ownership to say, I am aware of what the ministry is asking for. I am aware of what the agency is asking for, and this is why we're asking for. And at that point, I expect that going forward, the National Assembly interrogates some of those items. Now, there have been some advocates say that the national budget, this 2025 budget, should reflect national interest. I would not exactly understand what those who are canvassing that position mean. Now, are we talking about national interest in the sense that every region, every ministry gets development, gets some improvement, or we're asking for some form of representation as we have for national character or federal character? So you just give a particular region, you give a particular development agency some amount of money, not really minding what contribution it brings to the country at the end of the day. So if we're going to be talking about national interest, that national interest should be clearly spelled out so that it's not misunderstood that say satisfy this quota so there are no protests. Satisfy that quota so that there are no protests.
It's good that you have to work closely with these institutions of government. And I think it's also very important that people do not deliberately don't want to appear before the National Assembly. The bullying at National Assembly and
who believes who?
And the fear of embarrassment and the threat of war that come from the chambers is huge for some civil servants. And that's why a lot of people are always becoming hyperactive when it comes to this session. And one of the points I made in my presentation at the inauguration of PAC earlier in the year, last year, was the fact that the National Assembly must not see itself as an independent entity. It must see itself as interdependent with the executive and see how we can rub our hearts together to develop a country that works. And I think that's where the huge challenge is for most MDAs, that coming to the National Assembly is like people are afraid so that you avoid such experiences where you see people all of a sudden collapsing and falling at committee hearing because of the level of that conversation. Because what's on the table most of the time is much than what they say meets the eye. Because everybody is wanting to see how to realign the plans of agency of government. Because you're seeing, and this is what you see where people talk about padding. That I say, for example, I need to invest in technology this year so that our operations can become digital. And then you said to the member of the National Assembly and said, well, we want to start to digitize our process, and this is going to cost us like $10 billion to digitize. And then the member of the committee said, well, I don't think that is what is important. My people need a feeder road. So rather than give you 10 billion, I give you 1 billion, and I said, okay, the other 9 billion, factor it into the feeder road that goes to members' constituency project. These are distortions. And I think for national interest, the members of the National Assembly must sit down with the executive to articulate, that's the point I'm making, to say what are the priorities that will enhance our development globally for us. Okay. I mean, by global, I'm saying nationwide. Okay. To say, okay, constituency here, constituency there, what do we need to put in place so that we can be on the road to progress and prosperity? Both National Assembly and the executive must be able to come to an agreement so that the fund that agencies of government are going to be expending to do things that actually will drive growth and now move away from those issues and veer into areas, of course, which will give the members of the National Assembly some political score.
All right.
And I think that is not good for national development. Okay. And I think that's why a lot of people are talking about national interest, to see that we have to place the interest of the nation far above our political considerations and calculations.
I understand. I'm also saying that the implication of the phrase national interest should not be skewed to mean satisfy my constituency so that there is national peace. Period.
Okay. First of all, I think we should not go ahead of ourselves by saying maybe when we do this, that, or the other, at the end of the 8 years of the presidency. No, it's not 8 years. He has to, first of all, complete 4 years. Then we will go to the polls. The Nigerians are going to vote. Then whoever comes back, comes back. So we should not go ahead of ourselves to say at the end of 8 years, so it doesn't put off.
No. We're not talking about tenure. What I said,
I know. No, you said that earlier.
The conception of the road was that it will be completed in 8 years.
Conception of the road.
Of the coastal road will be completed in 8 years. So what I was referring to is how much money will be voted first year, second year, third year, fourth year, to the 8th year that will make the road to be completed. I'm not talking about tenure, please.
All right, great. Now, recently, there's this conversation of a particular agency, Shodex, Science and Technology Complex, somewhere in Abuja, headed by one Mr. the DG, someone's Oyinpreye, something like that. And it was before the House, and they were looking at this budget. And they said for the first year, money reflects. Second year, this amount of money reflects, and it increases that way. What have you done with them? Now we can't see what you have done so far for X number of years. We are going to make sure that we collapse your ministry, or we collapse your agency to another ministry, we merge it together, or your ministry completely goes into extinction because you're not doing anything. I think that's a high of the ego and a good way for probity to make sure that we know what we are spending money on, and when we vote money or allocate money for what purpose, we must see it reflect in the national polity and, of course, in the eye of development. The National Assembly has a role to play. If any ministry, department, and agency, either by their PAMSEC or by their minister, comes to defend budget and they are afraid to stand before the National Assembly, you should not be afraid. Billions of naira, hundreds of millions of dollars are put in the coffers of the treasury or in that particular ministry, so to speak, and you have been appointed to supervise and to oversee the expense of this money for specific projects. So now it's time for you to come give account because you are now demanding for new budgets to defend the previous budget and to talk about a new budget, and you are going to collapse. Please do not collapse, because it will be seen as a way of trying to evade questioning from the lawmakers who have been saddled with the responsibility to inquire and to ask questions on how you've spent the money in the past and how you are going to spend the current money that we are allocating to your ministry. And I don't think the National Assembly or the Red Chamber or the Green Chamber has gone above board or has gone beyond the belt when they start asking some questions that will make some PAMSECs or some chief accountant of ministries to faint. The executive arm of government has done its own job, either through the zero budgeting that Doc spoke about, or through the envelope system or method of budgeting that the National Assembly is trying to deal away with, to make sure that they have allocated funds for developmental purposes to support Mr. President's renewal hope agenda for the country. And so it is within the auspices, it is within the office of the Red Chamber or the Green Chamber to ask those questions. And if you're unable to give, to defend how those monies in the previous year were allocated to that administration to spend, or to that ministry to spend, if you're unable to give the specific amount for what purpose it was used, if you're unable to do that, I think the Senate or the House of Representatives, by way of advising the executive arm of government, is either going to carry out some level of punitive action against the minister or against the PAMSEC or the chief accountant of that specific ministry, because these are civil servants. Even though some of them who have actually spent this money for the purpose at which it was allocated for were political appointees, so that we have a good direction on where we are going. If not, the budget performance or anything about budget or the blueprint that the executive has in place will become just a facade and to just be a whitewash.
Okay, let me
the point I'm making, and I think it's good that you get this very clear. What I'm saying, we're talking about the collaboration, the complementarity of the National Assembly and the executive arm of government. They are not governing different nations. So budget defense should not become like a warfare or the struggle for supremacy between the executive and the legislature. That's the point I'm making. Now, when you see people who are going to Congress and you see their state of mind, because you can already think what's going to happen. I had a meeting with some public servants the other day, and I was looking at the figures and say, let's put this figure in perspective. Take, for example, in this year's budget 2025, presidency is about 450 billion. National Assembly is about 344 billion or 345 billion. Nigerian Judicial Service Commission about 341 billion. Now, you see some level of equality among the money that is going to the presidency, going to National Assembly, going to Judicial Service Commission. Now, but when you come to look at it and you talk to FDS and say, look, this money is infinitesimal compared to the entire budget that is presented, which is about 49 trillion. And you're seeing that MDA's about 28 billion is almost domiciled within you. And they will still come to tell you that out of that 28 that is given to them, that these people will still not give them the free hand to determine how this is spent. Now, this is where I am speaking to. So when I am talking to you, because I want to humiliate you so that I can gain advantage and power over you in negotiation, that cannot bring about national development. So what I'm saying is that when we are talking about national development, we should actually be able to sit down around the table and see what are the things that are going into this. Because, for example, the National Assembly is so powerful that it can't control. Take, for example, look at the budget, for example, look at the figure. Theirs is one-line budget. The 345 billion is one line. So we don't know what they're going to do with it. They don't tell anybody. What I'm saying is that if you are going to equity, let your hands also be clean to some extent. Now, when you ask MDA, oh, you have this item in your budget last year. You have this item in your budget the year before. You have this item in your budget 3 years ago. Now, the question to ask was that, what was the performance of this budget across these years? What was the size of the envelope that you received at the end of the day? Because budget is just a proposal. It's not an actual spend. So you are able to ask this person, okay, did he actually get this money?
To execute that
To execute their project. To know why the reason why this figure had to come back to the project. Because this issue was raised by a certain lawmaker who is no longer in the House about 3 years ago and said that he looked at the budget, the figures are coming back, the same thing. They budgeted for 24 computers in 2021, it's there again in 2022. But himself has not gone to say, okay, what's the General's report?
Okay.
Where this 24 computers bought in 2021 and we are asking for a new one in 2022. So this kind of transparency in conversation so that you don't blackmail people before the public just to score an advantage over them is the point that I'm making. There's a whole lot of horse trading that's going on as we speak, as this conversation about national budget is ongoing.
I get your point. That the National Assembly sometimes may seem antagonistic, which is really unnecessary because it's to make inquiry. The budget defense is to inquire into the proposed projects and how they will be utilized. Good. But it's not an excuse for any head of any ministry, department, or agency to say because they're antagonistic or I might be embarrassed, I would not show up. I give an example of defense, project defense in schools. There are some panels that you stand before. It's as if they've been waiting all along for you in the way they direct the questions at you. Even when you're responding, someone else is attacking here and there. But you've heard stories of how some students written their project by themselves. I know that some get people to write for them, but some write their project by themselves. But by the time they get into it, they seem confused because of the way the panels of lecturers, professors interrogate them. But it has not stopped any students from going for project defense because it is a required process that you must pass through. Same way, budget defense, that's what I'm coming. The budget defense is a required process for every ministry, whether or not they're antagonistic or not. It doesn't stop us too from appealing to them to be less antagonistic. And there are different ways this can be done. We can say, okay, ministries can choose the option of appearing physically or virtually. So that if you're appearing virtually, the energy in the room, you may not be feeling it that small. We can even give that option. We can even give that option if we say the temperature in the room.
That is why I'm saying that you see, there's an aspect of this school analysis you have failed to put. And I would love you to,
let me land my point.
Before you land, I want you to factor this conversation, that there are also students who told their parents, I'm not going back to school because a certain lecturer said I cannot make it through it.
Those are extreme cases.
Yes, I want you to factor those extreme cases because it's not all head of agencies and ministries who are not appearing. It's what information or feedback that is getting to these agencies I
have not said that all ministries do not. I'm saying it is not an excuse for any head or ministries, department, agencies to say, because they would be hostile to me, or I perceive they would be hostile to my ministry, I would not show up. For the aspect of hostility, we can tackle through giving the option of saying, appear virtually. I understand that, yes, when we watch budget defense, sometimes you discover that it is not the same approach that is applied to every ministry. There are some that come and they just ask them to take a bow after asking one or two questions. Same way even when we are screening for ministers. It is not the same, but there are some, it's as if, oh, they really gave that person or that minister or that head of the MDA a tough time. All of this can be handled, but notwithstanding, even with the current way it is being done, it is no excuse for any head to say because of this and that, they would not show up.
Okay, now the thing is, in 2016, the former governor of Ekiti State, Governor Ayodele Peter Fayoshe, wrote a letter to China when President Muhammadu Buhari was requesting for $2 billion loan to facilitate the Nigerian budget. And he wrote a letter, being in the opposition. I remember his administration was one in the turn of the flesh that, I won't say in the turn of the flesh, that played the role of an opposition in government while he was there in Ekiti State. He wrote a letter to China and that Nigerian people, by way of looking at the budget, we did not see the $2 billion that Mr. President is requesting by way of loan from China. We did not see it reflect in the budget of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And on this occasion, please don't give him the $2 billion. He wrote that letter. Now, I would expect, the president did not, of course, he didn't even turn an eye to him, just went to China and all of that and did it. And of course, we got the $2 billion. But I like the face and the tone of Fayose, not because I didn't see it from the prism of trying to hinder the Buhari's administration from carrying out his budget responsibilities or facilitating the projects that he has in his budget. No, I see it from the standpoint of an opposition who is demanding for good governance, demanding for transparency, and demanding for equity. Because he knows that those projects, some of those projects captured in the budget will come to Ekiti State. And he would like to make sure that he sees those things, being treated. But if some projects are not captured within the line of the budget, then why do we have Mr. President giving that as part of the reason why we should collect budget? Now, come to this administration. I don't see that coming from any state governor, probably because since the removal of fuel subsidy, they've been getting more money for that effect. But now, once we put eagle eye on the federal government, even though that's the budget we're discussing now, we should also put an eagle eye on the state governors, who now having lots of money in the state treasury and budgets lined up. For Lagos, it is 3.3 trillion naira. For Rivers State, it's like 1.03 trillion naira. And so for other states, they're having billions, 900 million, and all of that, almost a trillion naira. The members of the State House of Assembly, before whom the governor stands to present the budget, should not say, oh, we all belong to the same political party, so just come, bring the document, we'll sign, and you go. If the members of the same political party are going to toe that line, then opposition political heads should be able to do that. And those in the constituency level, in local government, well, they have been intimidated by the state governors, so I won't say they won't have that temerity to want to look at the state governors in their face. But private individuals, political opposition should stand up to it and make sure that the budget is being scrutinized level by level, project by project, and to follow up with probity, with oversight functions of trying to make sure that, oh, this is in the budget, but we can't see it on ground now. And this is 2 years, this is 3 years gone, the year is already gone. We did not see this. Why didn't we have it? And call the member of the House, call the member representing that constituency, either in the State House of Assembly or in the Federal House of Assembly, and say, look, this is what we have in the 2025 budget, but this is December, or this is October. Nothing is on ground. What happened? Did we not get any allocation for this purpose?
Yeah,
if we do things like that,
I think it's the same point we are making. The same point we are making. That budget should not become a witch hunting exercise.
True.
Budget should be done for national interests, development interests. You see, I listened to the chairman of the Presidential Tax Reform Committee spoke at the Manufacturing Association's event when he used the parable of where we were, what was, what is, and where we are going, and the 5 words that he used in that conversation. And the first word was where we were. And he gave and painted the picture of where we were at that particular point in time. You just talk about the Chinese borrowing. But you know that there's no president who can borrow without the approval of the National Assembly. Should it be the state government talking about the real reason for borrowing? Or it should be actually the arm of government that is supposed to be the check and the balance to the executive.
It's an opposition. He has the right.
No. I'm not saying it's wrong.
Okay.
I only ask a question.
Okay.
Who should be the one determining that should we go here or not go there? Is this not the arm of government that is supposed to be serving as check and balance to the executive? But several times, we see some of all these things pass. It's not as if those agencies that are appearing and they are passing, that everything about them is correct. That is the point that I am making. Okay. That defense of oil should not become transactional. Okay. That if you say you are not going to give me what I am, I will ensure that I don't get what you want.
So when you come before the house, we grill you.
So it should not be the flaunting of power, as it were. Because if you sit down and the head of agencies were to actually sit down to tell the world what they face going through these people, you sitting down here, you will want to take arm and go to that place and see how to chase everybody out. But what we're saying is that for the sake of national development, where we are today, looking at the level of poverty, infrastructural decay, and I think people must be much more nationalistic in handling the budget issue. Whether it's from the MDAs or the National Assembly that is scrutinizing, everybody must have the interest of national development at heart. And then we look at what works. How can the nation transition from where we are to where we want to be? The tax reform bill is before the National Assembly. The revenue collection bill is before the National Assembly. One will be asking that people are acting on those documents as we speak, so that we can see how to block the leakages that comes into revenue collection, so that Nigeria can actually see restoration. That the renewed hope that is promised by the current regime is seen by Nigeria. That's the point I'm making. And so everybody must be on deck to put the nation first, not their parochial interest, in the name of witch hunting other people. Because, like I said, don't forget, that realist definition of power by Mogetu is that when two people are in a relationship, you see one who is so powerful that can control the mind and the act of another, such that that person just follow and doesn't have option because he's so powerful to achieve some certain level of result. So while the consideration of this budget is going on, I, for one, will appeal for national interest to override personal, ethnic, sectional interest, so that at the end of the day, Nigeria can actually become the ecosystem where people who have portfolio investment, foreign direct investment, want to bring their money and see that things are working.
Maybe the way to handle that could just be us having some international observers in the house when budget defense is done, to ensure that nobody overexerts their power and
that
influence.
would be infringing on our sovereignty as a nation.
No. I'm talking about independent observers, not international observers.
Okay.
The independent observers could be CSOs.
Yeah, they are there.
So they should be able to check the process to ensure that nobody is. But they should not be. We should feel their own, get their own feedback. So
yeah, but at committee levels, you cannot. They cannot allow you in. No, because the room cannot accommodate anybody, because it's between committee members and the agency.
I think we need to look at that again, so that nobody is intimidated. While we'll also not make it a reason or give it as a leeway for some persons to use that as an excuse to evade interrogation of what is going to happen in their MDA. All right, let's look at what's been allocated to some ministries. If we look at the allocation, for some ministries, they got an increase. So for Ministry of Defense, they got an increase. Ministry of Finance got an increase. And some other ministries likewise. Some have crossed the billion mark and moved up to trillion in what is being allocated to them. So the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning got an increase of 2.33 trillion naira, or 52.35% to 6.78 trillion naira in 2025 budget. Ministry of Defense, with an appropriation of 2.92 trillion naira, got an increase of 1.34 trillion naira, or 84.81%. If we look at what's been allocated to some of the ministries, I know that each of you have something to respond to.
It will make sense really to even look at each ministry's budget because we can't do justice to look at where the increments are coming from and what are the line items and things that each ministry is supposed to be doing. And I think we can't put all these issues on the front burner. And I think there's a need for us to actually revisit MDAs by MDA and look at what the appropriation look like. Generally, looking at the framework of the budget, as it were, the numbers is fine. But delving into details, so that we don't lose out on some meat, really, is something that we can continue to talk about until the budget is passed, so that we can actually take ministry by ministry and do some comparative analysis and see what happened in terms of performance and where we are going toward.
Yeah, while we may need to revisit the issue, there are some meats that we can bring to the table today, which is the total allocation or what is budgeted for each ministry. So if the Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning is going to receive 6.78 trillion naira, and the Ministry of Defense is going to get an appropriation of 2.92 trillion naira, we could do some comparison.
You cannot compare, because you will need to find out what makes up the 6 trillion. Because I can tell you for sure, some statutory transfer and allocations are all in that budget. So it may not be a very good way of comparing figures. So except that you have to take ministry by ministry to see what's going into defense and what is it for, what is going into education. Now, Ministry of National Planning, and what is it meant for? Now, you can imagine that that's going to finance. Now, if you look at it, all the money that is going to be channeled out to third parties will go through that ministry, and they actually may not be the actual spend for the ministry. That's what I'm saying could be difficult, yeah.
Be that as may, looking at other ministries, Niger Delta Ministry got 2.23 trillion naira, Education got 2.52 trillion naira, Health got 1.91 trillion naira, and it moves on like that. But before we get the full size of the animal that was slaughtered here to know the different parts that were shared to the ministries, we can also look at what has been given to some ministries and the increases on the surface level. Priye.
Well, looking at I can't really tell which ministry at the moment got what and how compared to how much they got the previous year. But first of all, I would like to make some form of reference to the Ministry of Niger Delta Development Commission and the Ministry of Niger Delta we talked about. Since the administration of former President Olusegun Obasanjo, we thought it wise to create that ministry. Budget allocation year in, year out has been going to that ministry, and for the purpose of developing the Niger Delta states. And from then till as we speak, for political reasons and for the reasons of insecurity, banditry, and terrorism that ransacked the northern part of the country, the northwest, equally came up and said, "Hey, I think we also deserve this. We should get the Ministry of Northwest and Ministry of Development." The Southwest came up and said, "Oh, we also need one," and here we are. They've got. So I expect the Ministry of Niger Delta to have gone far ahead when it comes to development. There was an administration where, during the Buhari's administration, where the Ministry of Niger Delta was looked at, and there were threats to cut off allocation that comes to that ministry, because some of the monies that came into that ministry and some of the projects, the minister tend to have, said, "This is the project we are currently handling for the Niger Delta." And how they saw bridges with planks and sticks, and how much the minister said, "This is how much we've developed, we've earmarked for this bridge," running to billions. It was heart-wrenching, and people were disappointed. at the 90 Deltans who were crying foul that, look, we are being shortchanged by Nigerians, and Obasanjo in his wisdom set up the Ministry of 90 Delta, and they're heading nowhere. All the monies are being siphoned. So I think now they're the cause of their problems, and the 2025 budget should not go down the drain the same way.
Yeah, but look at it, Krumale. And I think one of the big issue here is the fact that we don't deal with root causes here as a nation. We always like to treat symptoms. And that's why things have been this bad for us. For God's sake, what's the meaning of the Ministry of Niger Delta? What's the meaning of NDDC? What's the meaning of Northwest Development Commission? What's the meaning of Southwest Development Commission? Except that we just deliberately treat symptoms.
Is that not the other definition of national interest?
See, look at it, for example. What is missing? There are no roads in Niger Delta, isn't that?
Yeah.
So what do we need to do? Build roads. There are no bridges connecting communities in Niger Delta. What do we do? Build bridges. There are no schools in Niger Delta area. What do we do? Build schools. Now, Ministry of Works and Housing can handle these issues conveniently without creating bureaucracy that eats up the money. I tell you something. I did a study on Niger Delta. In 2006, when, of course, this happened, what did you get? 80% of the budget that year was spent on capital projects, 20% on overhead. 5 years down the line, 80% of that budget is spent on overhead, only 20% gets to capital
projects.
So, which means that you just create those agencies to settle political boys and not really meaning to deal with the issues in the area. And that is why I'm saying that for us to be able to talk about having a budget that does well, we must sit down on the table first and foremost. The regime that is serious about handling the issues of Nigeria and say, what are the issues? What are the issues, for example, in the Northwest? What are the issues in the Northeast? What are the issues in the North Central that we need to deal with? What are the infrastructure challenges in these places? Now, how are we going to allocate money so that the ministries that are already created are there with their hands on the deck and solving this problem? And then, of course, these communities are empowered to monitor this project to see that the quality is delivered. But rather than treat root cause, we focus on treating symptoms, and we are never healed.
But Doc, there's also allegation against the government, the federal government, during those times that, look, there is the Ministry of, like you mentioned, that Mr. Fashola handled, Ministry of Infrastructure, Development and Housing, Works and Housing, that there's politicking. There was criticism against the ministry that there was politicking, and the Niger Delta was not given priority, and they were not brought into the picture by way of building infrastructure. So the Ministry of the Niger Delta Affairs is supposed to cater to that. The NDDC was supposed to cater to that.
What I'm saying is that
if they are not doing that, it is
the fact that you have identified. If I were president, I would call Fashola to a table, for example, and ask him, and I said, these are my priorities for this government. To see things tangible, we have to deal with the issues in the Niger Delta. And therefore, for this year's budget, I want to see...
NDDC, I'm giving it to you.
No, I want to see Project X, Y, Z done in the Niger Delta. I want to see all the coastal road linked together. I want to see bridges built and commissioned.
So it's like
now,
having development
to
done.
prioritize it.
It's like
rather than set up
a separate ministry.
What is it? An institution which is siphoning money. Now, because if you put on record and you actually go to check, like you have rightly said, what monies that are passed through these agencies and what impact is having on the local people, in some cases, you see them. I was in the Niger Delta to do a study for all the 9 Niger Delta states. I still have the report on my system. where people will say, oh, they commissioned this water today, the person who comes, the NDC MD who comes to commission it, they fetch water for him, and then the following day the water stopped running. All these are happening. And these are happening because we are creating substructures for political interest, so not really for national development.
Is this substructures that we are creating, is it not the meaning or the meaning some persons have given to national interest? Because when the Niger Delta...
No, that's national interest. It can't be national interest. If it's national interest, it's what going to add value to the collective.
What I'm saying is that there is national interest which is for the country. But some persons hide under sectional interest to call for, in quotes, national interest. Because if you look at how the Niger Delta Development Commission was formed, it just took a number of years before we have that replicated in other regions given different needs.
Yes.
Because other sections of the country felt we need to have our own share of the national cake. And so for some appeasing to be done in order for national peace, it was created. If we agree that we need to determine what national interest represents and not means what you give to Paul, give to Peter, whether Peter actually needs what Paul is giving, then we are not going anywhere.
But that's the point I'm making. That these are treating symptoms. They are not addressing the root causes. What's the root cause? Take, for example, Northeast Development Commission. That there was a civil war fought over 30 years ago. And there was some devastation done to the Southeast. That in 1967, we entered into a war. By 1970, the war ended. And Gowon declared, as the president of Nigeria then, or the head of state, that there was no victor, there was no vanquish. And plans were supposed to be put in place to ensure the development of the Southeast so that it can recover from the effect of the civil war. Is that not what we want to do? Now, what I'm saying is, as a president of Nigeria, I don't need a commission to do that. All I just need to do is to factor those interests into the already existing structure, so that we are not, look at it. Take, for example, we're having a budget of 49.7 trillion, where, for example, you are going to take 16 trillion for debt service and sinking fund, now 14 billion for overhead, and 14 billion for capital project. Now we can reduce the size of government, really, so that we can actually apply the fund to solve the real problem that are on the ground. Okay. So we are not...
It's solving the problem that is
Take, for example, what is the Ministry
of
Niger Delta doing with the headquarters in Abuja?
Okay. Now you've hit the nail on the head. Now, look at this. In Buhari's administration, the Ogoni people in Rivers State, fought that administration that, look, you must clean our environment. The oil spill in our environment is devastating. Yes. Our fishermen cannot go to fish anymore. Yes. Farmers cannot go to farms anymore. And they name out all the consequences by way of oil spillage and gas flaring in that part. They were right, and they did that. And the Buhari's administration promised, I'm going to take care of it till today. That is a precedent for whom the buck stopped at its table. So let's assume, like you rightly said, he factored that into his priority and he had given that out to someone to take care of. And the person didn't do that because at the moment we don't think the Ogoni land or the oil spill in the Niger Delta has been cleaned off. No. The Niger Delta, and people will raise an eyebrow and say, oh, don't mind him, he's a northerner. That's why he didn't give priority to us in the Niger Delta, even though we are laying laying the egg that is feeding the whole nation. Okay, now you have the NDDC, or the Minister of Niger Delta Affairs. These are your people.
For close to 20 years.
These are your
How
people.
has this solved the problem of the Niger Delta? That's the question.
If we're looking at not creating
that's what I'm talking about, treating what you call root causes rather than deal with symptoms. Now, if a regime is serious, in Nigeria we have these multiplications. Yeah, but we can create agencies.
So in creating agencies and creating some other ministries to take care of, or agencies to take care of something that a particular ministry is supposed to handle, I don't think we should be talking alone about the Niger Delta Development Commission. TED Fund. Why not give all of that money
to the
Ministry of Education? Why are we creating some duplicates of certain ministries and agencies to handle what one ministry can handle? So it should not be alone about Niger Delta. This is something that I think if we even go round, we will find.
We just use it
as
a
sample. I understand.
And there are so many.
I understand.
There are so many that we can begin
to
look at it, that what is the real problem we have as a country is the fact that what Claude Ake, God bless his soul, has said years back in all of his writing, that we have never put development on the front burners of the nation. What has always been on the front burner is politics. I said it last week Friday. Statesmen are the ones who think about the next generation. Politicians think about the next election. All of this creation of ministries, agency, duplication, telephone, call it by whatever name, are just to settle political jobbers so that we can win the next election. But I don't think that they are things that are designed really for national transformation. And if we are serious about national transformation, we should empower all these ministries that already exist and give them mandate to deliver. And who cannot deliver, we show them the way out and get people who are competent enough to drive the process and ensure that development
we need to bring in post perspective at this point in time. The thing is, I understand clearly about the NDDC example. I just added tech funds. So if we look at it, that means we just be saving government a lot that goes into recurrent expenditure. So maybe capital expenditure can get a lot. We cannot exhaust every part of the 2025 budget in just one show. So it's a continuum. We'll continue looking at it until the ministries department get their money, and even the ministries that have not defended go to the National Assembly to defend, because the lawmakers have said if you don't show up, then it means that you don't need the money.